Hello everyone, this is Dr. MacKenzie again, and this time we are going on to another installment of Coaching for Performance. I have the privilege of hosting Hollie Spencer again. You probably heard from her on the first recording. Hello Hollie, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Thank you so much. Last time we were talking about the demystification of coaching as a negative perception and the difference between coaching versus mentoring. This time I'd like to glue that with another topic that we have covered in class or cover in class. It relates to a theory, the Levinson theory, that talks about the stages of adulthood. My participants have already taken a look at it. Are you familiar with that theory that pretty much kind of equates to the generational stages?
Yeah, I am familiar with the theory, and it's quite interesting to me because I take great interest in generations and the generation gaps. So, this is definitely a theory that's right up my alley that I enjoy studying.
And that's why I'm glad because initially I have asked in the past, well, why do we have to really look at this theory when we're talking about coaching? Well, thinking about that perception of coaching negative or positively, I started to think about this Levinson theory and how we are in a different stage of our lives. When we receive or ask for coaching, I think we're in a different level or a different stage of our life. I equate that to the generations, like the millennials, the Gen Xers, Gen Zs, etc. I don't want to make this conversation necessarily about the generations, but I definitely like to talk about how, depending on where we are in each of those generations or where we are in the stages of adulthood, kind of extrapolating Levinson here, how coaching can be perceived incorrectly or it's not as helpful as we want it to be. So, as an HR practitioner, one of the things to consider is what level or what stage of adulthood is the person that is going to be coached or needs to be coached for elevation of that performance. So, when we think about that, do you believe that a coaching style can be adapted based on the stage of the person in the workplace?
I think it has to be, right? Because it's something that, if you think about somebody that's just going into the workforce, they've graduated college and they're just seeking out their first professional role, it's more than likely they're not going to seek out a coach for performance, right? They are getting in there, they've gone through the schooling, might have been in 4, 6, 10 years of schooling, and they're ready to go out in the workforce and make their impact on the world. So they're not going to seek out a coach at first. But somebody that's been in the workforce for a while might realize that they're in a position where they do need to or want to seek out a coach. And somebody else might be stuck in their career. Sometimes, we get to a point in our career where we've done a lot of work and we've done a lot of good in a certain realm and we're ready to move on to something else. We're ready to tie a bow onto that and then move on to something else, but we just don't know where to go at that point. And that could happen in these different stages of adulthood. So if you think about somebody that is a Gen X, they've been in the workforce for 20, 25 years now. And they're probably and could be in management, middle management, and even upper management roles. But they might be stuck in a place that they need to elevate to the next position. And having a coach for that performance and for that development could help them.
You made me think about those life coaches that I have heard about. And for those that have heard about that or have even experienced that, it's a life coach can come into your life no matter where you are, right? Because the whole purpose is to elevate your life. So I'm glad to hear you talk about that. And definitely from a practitioner standpoint, it's important to realize that. And I love when you said, depending on where you are in your life, because I remember when I first started working many, many, many years ago, I remember that I didn't seek any coaching, nor did I need or feel the need for coaching, yet I was being coached. Conversely to that, though, I remember a close person years ago. I considered this person was very experienced in a subject, and one of their supervisors mentioned we are going to teach you how to be a good XYZ. And this person felt a little irritated about it because they were being, the implication was that this person needed coaching without acknowledging the expertise that this person already had. So now that we're talking about those generations, I believe it's important to also keep in mind where the person is, meet them where they are, and then offer the coaching. So I know you have had several experiences of coaching others in the past. You have a team, so you have people that are performing. Have you had an instance where someone is performing and because of that generation, the coaching that you provide them to enhance their performance is misconstrued or misinterpreted or has been?
Yeah, I think that happens. It's interesting that you just said meet them where they are, right? Because that really is what coaching does. Where are you and where do we want to elevate to? So it's nice that you brought that into the conversation. But I have had instances where I am more of that sharing the knowledge that I have because someone coached me along the way, and so I'm sharing that knowledge with somebody else. And so I had a recent incident where I I was doing a workshop and was providing some guidance to somebody else just because it was something that I had learned along the way and felt like I could just share that. And I was told I wasn't going to do that. That wasn't anything that I was going to do. So you really didn't need to provide me with that feedback. And it's interesting because that really put the negative spin on feedback and coaching versus I'm going to share some information with you that somebody shared with me, and I think it's helpful. And it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
about the performance, and it wasn't about doing something wrong or something that shouldn't have been done. It
Mm-hmm.
was truly just about I'm going to share some information with you and some insights with you. So I think that it's important sometimes. I should have probably said, "Are you in the space?" or "Let me help you," and set that up a little bit better than I did. But I also wasn't trying to really provide feedback in that sense at that point in time.
I really like that. It reminds me of, in the true sense of feedback, that feedback circle. One of the things that I constantly say, and actually I have done it in other classes, where I say we always have to consider that feedback is a gift, as long as the person that is providing it has the permission to give us that feedback. We don't want a gift that we don't want, in a way of speaking. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And then the second thing is, that I'm gathering from what you're saying, is definitely the style. Prepare the stage for it. And I think that kind of takes us back to the first recording when we were talking about the misperception of coaching. Unfortunately, when people go guns a blazing and say, "Let me provide you with some coaching," immediately they are setting the stage for a negative, right? So you have to make that statement of, or that declaration of, let me, not necessarily let me coach you on, but then me definitely let's focus on your performance. Off radio, we were talking about the equivalency of soccer coaches. I know you have been close to that lately, not necessarily that you're coaching it, but you have seen the coaching of the soccer sport for young teenagers, would say. And what is your experience about that? I don't want to necessarily steal your thunder about it. What has been your revelation?
Yeah, so I'm going to tie this back to the Levinson theory a little bit in an attempt of that. If you think about that first stage, that's somebody that's probably under 22 years old. And as you said, being close to preteen and adolescent coaching in the soccer. So I'll sit on the sidelines as a parent cheering on the the performers or the soccer players, right? And notice that somebody needs to fill a gap over here, or we need to have somebody that is blocking on the other side and not letting anybody drive up the middle and different things like that. And from the sidelines, I can see that. One, I can see it because I'm getting it from a different angle, but two, because I'm in a completely different stage. I'm in that more of that midlife transition stage versus that early era of pre-adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, right? And so there comes a time when that evolves for all of us over time, that we're looking at it through a different lens. So what might be said to somebody in a coaching platform in a sporting event to a preteen is going to be different than somebody seeing it from the sideline and in a different stage of life.
Mm-hmm. You're making me think. That is such a great point. Thank you for highlighting that. Because when I jump over to the mentoring, which we have said in the past, while it is different than coaching, for the purposes of my course, we are going to use both terminologies exchangeably. Yet, the point that you just made about that mentoring, it definitely makes good sense. I am going to seek a mentor, meaning I am going to seek the guidance of a person who has already done the work, right? So they can give me their insights. And that's where you were talking about on the previous recording, that it is different than coaching. Because I remember also in the book we are using in the program, Coaching for Performance by John Whitmore, I remember in one instance he talked about tennis player coaches. They did an experiment where they had a coach for tennis players who wasn't a tennis player, but he or she knew the intricacies of the game. And so what they did to create that connection between the coachee and the coach was to dress the coach as a tennis player so that the psychological perception was there, right? And same in mentoring, we're seeking for that guidance, except the mentor has already experienced it, whereas the coach has an understanding of it. I really like that point. Well, let me actually ask you one last thing, and we're going to go off script for just a little bit here to wrap up today. In your work, previous work, we mentioned before that you have coached people and they have sought you. What would you say? What would be your initial remark about coaching for performance? Thinking back on the times when you have coached someone because they have sought you out.
Yeah, so I have a few examples of times that I was sought out as a coach. And I think one of the things that you have to do is to make yourself available and making sure that you're connecting with people in a very informal way, because once you start connecting with the people in an informal way, it gets more formal, right? Because we talked a little bit last time about the vulnerability and about how you have to ensure that the coach is a good match for you. So being able to have somebody that you can have that very vulnerable and very real conversation with is important. And, I've had people in my career that come to me starting out in a very informal way, and we set up that formal process. And they're really seeking out guidance on how do I get to that next level in my career? I've been in this position for a while, and I think I'm ready to perform at another level. And so we start talking about, what do you want to do? Where do you see yourself? What sounds good to you? What looks good to you? And then start creating a plan of smaller milestones to get to that. I've also had people that come to me because they've received feedback. So we talk a little bit about feedback. They receive feedback that they need to be a little bit more concise in their communications, or they need to be clearer in their message to people. And so we start working on those things. Well, what does it look like right now? What is what is the feedback that you have received? And then we start, I've done some observations before on performance and how people are speaking, so that we can understand where they are
Mm-hmm.
and then where they want to go. And then really asking them, what does this look like to you in the next 6 months? Where do you want to be? And then helping them to get to that place. So I think that there's the performance, and I want a new role, I want to develop in my organization. And hey, I'm really good at all of these things, but I have this one thing that's holding me back. How do I develop that?
That's great. That's great. Holly, thank you so much for your insights. And again, I hope that we can have another conversation of this, because it's so insightful to hear, as a practitioner that you are, how we can share these perspectives with these colleagues that are forming themselves in this program. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.